So the 97-98 Houston Rockets, it looks good as a team. It looks sound wise, it's sound. You know, Charles Barkley, Clyde Drexler, Akeem Olajuwon. So right there, you got three Hall of Famers on one team, possibly a fourth, because Kevin Willis actually have a very, very great career. Atlanta Hawks and so forth. So he had a great career. There's a few of them. Brent Price was decent. Mark Price brother. So Eddie Johnson was decent back in the day. He used to play for Seattle and whatnot. Mario Ellie had a great shot. He was good to be dependable. But Charles Barkley had already gave the best of his years between Philadelphia 76ers and Phoenix Suns. Both times, like especially with Phoenix, where he took them all the way up against Mike and almost got to the championship the whole nine. Same thing with Clyde Drexler. He had already gave his best years to Portland, played Mike again in finals in '92 and whatnot. So he had already burnt himself out. Hakeem Olajuwon was towards the end of his career. He still was extremely fundamentally sound and very good and could still hold his own against the big lights of like Shaq, David Robinson, and so forth, Patrick Ewing, and so forth. So he was still right where he kind of needed to be, but he was also, towards the end of his career. Outside of Charles Barkley actually being at that point maybe a 6 or a 7 compared to the 10 that he used to operate at. Clyde Drexler at that time being maybe a 6 or 7 as well, compared to the 10 that he operated as Clyde the Glide and the round mound and rebound. So when you think about that, they had already dwindled to about 60 to 70% of the players that they used to be. Hakeem Olajuwon was probably down about 10% at this time from his peak because he had also been around for over close to a decade or so. So right here, they had a lot of veterans. They had a lot of basketball knowledge. They had a lot of fundamentals. They had a lot of basketball IQ, but they did not have the energy and they did not have the go to compete with maybe the likes of like Shaq and Kobe or David Robinson, Tim Duncan. Like there were other teams that were still moving fast, and both of those teams still had a multitude of weapons that could run circles around a lot of their additional weapons. Like I said, Eddie Johnson, Clyde Drexler, Charles Barkley, Hakeem Olajuwon, Kevin Willis. Most of these people were on the back end of their careers by 97, 98. So anybody that's moving extremely fast and had a young run gun fast team like San Antonio or the Lakers and whatnot at that time would be very difficult for a lot of these players on here to keep up with. They were a very sound team. You could have kept Olajuwon, Barkley, Clyde Drexler, Mario Ellie, Eddie Johnson, Kevin Willis, but you should have replaced at least the other players with at least not, and some of them were still decent. I'm not saying that, like a lot of them were still decent. Harrington was still decent. I'm not saying none of them weren't, but none of them could compete with like say a Kobe or Sean Elliott or Ginobili or certain players like that. That they never had a chance, unfortunately. They just never had a chance. Nowhere around the board they couldn't compete. They were out net man. They were outnumbered. They were out aged. They were, yes, all the way around the board. They were